Titled On a Knife Edge, Iran asks Vladimir Putin to eliminate US dollar and isolate America. Iran's supreme leader has urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to join forces with Tehran to beat the United States sanctions against them by ditching the dollar. Mr. Khomeini said, by ignoring the negative propaganda of the enemies that seek to weaken relations between countries, we can nullify US sanctions, using methods such as eliminating the dollar and replacing it with national currencies in transactions between two or more parties, thus, isolate the Americans. Mr. Putin met Iranian political leaders in an effort to nurture a warming relationship strengthened since Donald Trump recently threatened to abandon the international nuclear deal with Iran reached in 2015. Tehran and Russia are the main allies of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, while the US, Turkey and most Arab states support rebel groups fighting to overthrow him. Iran's supreme leader has urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to join forces with Tehran to beat the United States sanctions against them by ditching the dollar. AFP Ayatollah Ali Khomeini urged Vladimir Putin to join forces with Tehran to beat Donald Trump. Ayatollah Ali Khomeini branded the US an enemy and urged Moscow to completely sever ties with the US currency. Mr. Khomeini said, by ignoring the negative propaganda of the enemies that seek to weaken relations between countries, we can nullify US sanctions, using methods such as eliminating the dollar and replacing it with national currencies in transactions between two or more parties, thus, isolate the Americans. Mr. Putin met Iranian political leaders in an effort to nurture a warming relationship strengthened since Donald Trump recently threatened to abandon the international nuclear deal with Iran reached in 2015. Tehran and Russia are the main allies of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, while the US, Turkey and most Arab states support rebel groups fighting to overthrow him. Mr. Khomeini wants to step up cooperation to enable peace in the Middle East, Iranian state TV reported. During a meeting with Putin, he said, full resolution of Syria's crisis needs strong cooperation between Iran and Russia. Our cooperation can isolate America. This cooperation will restore stability in the region. The Supreme Leader believes that economic relations have room for improvement in the Middle East. He said, in the transportation sector, we can expand cooperation, using the main axis of Chabahar port to the port of St. Petersburg, as well as in other economic areas. Since Russia's military intervention in Syria's war in 2015, and with stepped-up Iranian military assistance, Mr. Assad has taken back large amounts of territory from rebels as well as swathes of central and eastern Syria from Islamic State militants. AFP Putin met the Iranian leader in an effort to nurture a warming relationship. Moscow is now trying to build on that success with a new diplomatic initiative, including a Congress of Syria's rival parties it plans in the Black Sea resort of Sochi on November 8.
Greatness is embracing the unknown and coding it line by line. Greatness is building a mobile app that changes the way human beings interact.
18th, though a major opposition bloc has refused to take part. Pragmatist Iranian President Hassan Rouhani echoed Mr. Khomeini, saying Iran and Russia together could tackle regional terrorism, an allusion to Sunni Muslim armed groups hostile to Iran, Assad, and many other Arab states. Mr. Rouhani said, our cooperation has helped the fight against terrorism in the region. Together we can establish regional peace and security. The rapprochement between Iran and Russia is worrying for both Saudi Arabia, Shiite Muslim Tehran's main Sunni rival for dominance in the Middle East, and the United States. AFP Moscow is also an important ally for Iran in its renewed confrontation with the United States. Mr. Putin praised cooperation with Iran as very productive. He said, we are managing to coordinate our positions on the Syrian issue. Moscow is also an important ally for Iran in its renewed confrontation with the United States, where Trump broke ranks with major allies on October 13 by decertifying Tehran's nuclear deal with 6 world powers including Washington under his predecessor Barack Obama. Mr. Trump has called the agreement the worst deal ever negotiated and branded Iran a terrorist nation for involvement in conflicts in the Middle East. Mr. Putin told Khomeini, we oppose any unilateral change in the multilateral nuclear deal. An official said, both Russia and Iran are under American pressure. Tehran has no other choice but to rely on Moscow to ease the US pressure. Iran encourages Russia to ditch the dollar. Iran has suggested isolating the US by ditching the dollar during a meeting yesterday with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Tehran. Remonstrating against US threats to impose new sanctions and cancel the nuclear agreement, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei said, "We can nullify US sanctions, using methods such as eliminating the dollar and replacing it with national currencies in transactions between two or more parties, thus, isolate the Americans." Putin, who is visiting the region for trade talks, gave strong backing to the nuclear deal with major world powers. Moscow has condemned America's unilateral sanctions against Iran as illegal. Putin considers Iran a strategic partner and a great neighbor, adding that Russia will take advantage of every opportunity to expand and consolidate relationships in all dimensions. The Russian premier criticized American interference in the region and described his country's warm relations with Tehran. Despite the sanctions, Putin said, "We devoted our funds to scientific and technological progress, and we had significant growth in the fields of biotechnology, IT, agriculture and space industries. Now, in spite of the initial concerns, we have realized that we can do whatever we decide to." This isn't the first time the mullahs in Iran have threatened to ditch the dollar for US misdemeanor.